My daughter gave her mother-in-law a 7-day trip to Cancun and a $22,000 diamond bracelet. On my 70th birthday, I got a $7 bus ticket and not a single birthday wish. I sat through that night, holding the thin envelope, my chest hollow and cold. Perhaps being forgotten was the moment I remembered who I was. And from that cheap little ticket, I made them face what they once called a duty. I turned 70 the same day my daughter Amanda gifted her mother-in-law a week-long resort stay in Cancun and a diamond bracelet worth $22,000. I know the exact price because the bracelet made it onto a morning show segment about extravagant Mother's Day gifts. Amanda was there, on screen, glowing and beaming. She called her mother-in-law the most generous and graceful woman she had ever known. Back at my kitchen table in Oregon, I opened a slim envelope addressed in Amanda's handwriting. Inside was a Greyhound bus ticket. $7, Portland to Seattle, one way. No note, no happy birthday, not even my name. I stared at the ticket for a while. It wasn't anger I felt. Not yet. It was more like something small inside me folding in on itself, like breath that refused to come all the way out. That morning, I'd baked myself a small lemon cake. Habit, really. I made it every year. Amanda used to love it. She would steal the corners, the ones with the extra icing. I kept telling myself maybe she forgot. Maybe she was overwhelmed. Maybe it was Vincent, her husband. He always had a way of centering everything around his family. Still, the contrast burned. A luxury vacation and a sparkling bracelet for one mother, a bus ticket for the other. I turned the TV off. The sound of the audience clapping made my hands shake. Later that afternoon, I checked my phone. One message, a promotional text from my pharmacy. I remember sitting in my living room and looking out the window. My neighbor's dog was barking at the mailman. Something about that sound felt more familiar than the silence from Amanda. I don't know what hurt more, the absence of a gesture, or the certainty that it was not an accident. She had made her choice. You spend decades building a bond. You raise a child, sacrifice sleep, money, time, entire years of your life. Then one day you are no longer part of the equation. Somewhere in her world, I had been reduced to a task. I folded the bus ticket and put it in my wallet, not as a memento, not even as a wound, but as proof. Something had shifted, and if you're listening to this, maybe you know the feeling, that exact moment when you realize you are no longer being seen. Not really. I didn't cry that night, but I also didn't sleep, because deep down, I understood. She hadn't just forgotten my birthday, she had forgotten me. 2 days after my birthday, Amanda posted 37 photos from the trip to Cancun. Her caption read, "Real family is where love comes first." The album had her and her mother-in-law sipping from coconut drinks by the pool, matching sun hats, gold bangles catching the light. Vincent stood behind them in some of the shots, smiling, hands resting on both their shoulders like a man who had it all. I wasn't in any of those photos. I scrolled through them slowly, one hand resting on the edge of the table, the other sliding across the screen. In one picture, they stood in front of a white marble fountain. Amanda was hugging her mother-in-law from behind. The woman was holding up the bracelet, that $22,000 sparkle, and both of them were laughing. That image stayed with me longer than it should have. I closed the album and set my phone down. Somewhere inside my closet was a box labeled Amanda's birthdays. Over the years, I had kept small things. A drawing she made in second grade with the words, "Best Mommy in the Galaxy," a faded party hat from her 12th, a grocery receipt for the lemon cake ingredients from her 17th, when she insisted we bake together instead of going out. She used to say I made her feel safe, that no matter what happened at school or with friends, She could always come home to me. I didn't pull out the box. I just stood in the closet doorway and stared at the spot where I knew it was. Later that night, I went to my bookshelf and opened an old planner from 15 years ago. Inside were notes in my handwriting, Amanda's college tuition deadlines, Vincent's allergy list before they moved in with me after the wedding. They stayed with me for 10 months. Back then, Amanda had lost her job and Vincent's app project had collapsed. I paid most of the rent, cooked every meal, bought their groceries. When Amanda was pregnant with their second child, I even sold my car to cover her hospital fees. I had never asked for anything back. Not because I was noble, just because that's what I thought mothers did. And now, seeing her post about Cancun, calling someone else family, it didn't feel like distance. It felt like erasure, a clean wipe. I sat at the dining table and opened my email. Amanda's last message was dated 4 months ago. She had asked me to water the plants while they went away for the weekend. There was no thank you after that, no follow-up, just silence. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window. Outside, the streetlight flickered. A dog barked in the distance. It hit me then. Love, once so loud and chaotic in our home, had gone quiet. Not because it burned out, but because someone had walked away from it. And I hadn't realized I was the only one left standing in the smoke. It was around 10:30 on a Thursday morning when I finally opened that old voicemail folder. I hadn't touched it in months. Most of the recordings were junk. Delivery confirmations, appointment reminders. One was Amanda laughing with her kids in the background, leaving a quick message about dropping off soup. That one I had saved. But near the bottom of the list, there was a message labeled simply as Auto Save 3. I didn't remember ever playing it. I tapped it without thinking. The first voice was Amanda's, sharp, casual, and unmistakably hers. She was talking to someone, probably a friend. Her tone was light, dismissive, almost amused. She said, I mean, I love her, she's my mum, but let's be honest, it's more of an obligation at this point. There was a pause. The other person laughed. Amanda kept going. Vincent's mum, now she's family, real family, she's here, she listens, she supports what we're building. My mum had her time. Now she's just background. I hit pause. Then I hit stop. I sat still for maybe 5 full minutes. My hand was still on the phone, but I wasn't holding it anymore. Not really. The words weren't shouted. They weren't said in anger, and somehow that made them worse. Amanda hadn't just said something cruel. She had said something true. At least, true in her mind. She had demoted me. Quietly. Permanently. Obligation. Background. I had become the wallpaper in her life. Always there. Always faded. And she hadn't even thought twice about saying it out loud. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, opened a cabinet, closed it again. I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed to move. There were dishes in the sink I hadn't washed in 2 days. I let them be. I walked to the back porch, sat on the old swing, and let my hands rest on my knees. Obligation. I whispered the word to myself, rolled it over slowly like tasting something bitter. So many years I had bent myself into shapes for Amanda. Cancelled plans, taken extra shifts, skipped meals. I remembered once giving up a weekend retreat with my old book club because Amanda needed help moving. She didn't even unpack until 3 weeks later. And yet, in the end, I was a checkbox, a yearly phone call, a seat she never meant to fill. The swing creaked beneath me as I leaned back. I wasn't angry, not in the way I expected to be. I was simply tired. tired of defending my place in her life, tired of pretending small kindnesses made up for the widening distance. That voicemail had done something irreversible. It clarified the fog. Amanda saw me as someone to manage, to handle, to push aside when more important things needed room. And I had let it happen, bit by bit, smile by smile. Inside the house, the TV was still on. I could hear some morning talk show host chatting about spring recipes. The sound felt miles away. I turned my phone off. No one was going to call. And if they did, I didn't need to hear it. I had heard enough. The Greyhound bus pulled into the station just past noon, engine hissing like it needed a break more than I did. I climbed the steps slowly, one hand on the rail, the other clutching a tote bag with a sandwich, a paperback, and a folded sweater. Seat 14A was empty, but I kept walking. I don't know why, but I stopped at 17A. She was already sitting there. A woman in her late 60s, maybe early 70s. Skin sun-worn and soft, grey-streaked hair pulled into a loose knot. Her jacket had lint on the collar, and her hands rested calmly in her lap. She looked up, saw my hesitation, and slid her bag off the seat without a word. I sat down beside her. The bus started moving, and the road stretched ahead like something that didn't care who we were or where we were going. We didn't speak for a while. She opened a book, the kind with a cracked spine and no cover left. I stared out the window, counting fence posts, blinking slower than usual. Eventually, she looked up and said, quiet like it was just for me, "Long ride today." I nodded, said something about visiting old places, maybe finding a few new ones. She smiled, not kindly, not bitterly, just like someone who had lived enough to know that people talk around the truth before they ever name it. Her name was Ruth. She used to work in a laundromat outside Eugene, raised one son on her own, said he had kind eyes as a child. She repeated that part twice. I asked where he was now. She said, he stopped calling after she couldn't co-sign for his surgery. I didn't ask more. She didn't sound angry, just empty in a way I recognized. He told her he needed help. She had already sold her wedding ring, her husband's tools, even the watch she kept in a drawer for decades. When the bank denied her application, he called her selfish, said she had no use anymore if she couldn't offer anything. Then he left. That was 2 years ago. Since then, she had ridden the bus every few months, just picked a route, sat down, and let the wheels carry her someplace else. She said it reminded her that she was still moving, still in motion, still choosing something. I told her I liked that. We didn't talk much after that. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was gentle. Two people sitting next to grief without poking at it. Halfway through the trip, she offered me a hard peppermint from her coat pocket. I took it. When we reached Portland, she stood up, adjusted her coat, and turned to me. "You're not just a mother," she said. "You're still a woman. You still get to decide what comes next." Then she was gone. And for some reason, that stuck. I wasn't sure what I had expected from that ride, but I knew now it wasn't an escape. It was a reminder. Even strangers can see you more clearly than the people who share your blood. I folded the peppermint wrapper and slipped it into my wallet next to the bus ticket. Not because I was sentimental, but because somehow I knew I would need to remember her words later. The library looked exactly the same as the last time I stepped through its glass doors. Same faded blue carpet, same scuffed wooden counters, same silence thick enough to make your own footsteps feel loud. The main bulletin board had been updated with new flyers, ESL tutoring, craft workshops, free tax prep. But the dust behind the glass frame hadn't been wiped. That comforted me in some small way. I walked past the circulation desk and down the south wing hallway. My shoes made soft sounds against the tile. At the end of the hall, where the reference section used to be, I saw the board. My name was still there, Inez Sharp, under a laminated heading that read, Honoring 25 years of service. My photo was crooked. The edge of the plastic cover had curled, but it was there. I stood in front of it longer than I meant to, not because I missed the job, but because it reminded me of who I used to be, before I became a name that got left off party invites. Before my identity was reduced to someone's mother, someone's ride, someone's emergency contact. A voice called out behind me, "They still let you in this place?" I turned around. Dorothy Kim. She used to work 3 shelves down from me in the old periodicals section. Now, apparently, she wore a blazer sharp enough to cut glass. Her hair was shorter, dyed darker, but her laugh hadn't changed. We hugged, not a long one, just enough to recognize time had passed but not erased anything. She asked what brought me back. I said I wasn't sure. Dorothy was helping organize a program for women over 60 looking to re-enter the workforce. She asked if I wanted to stay and listen. I ended up sitting in the back row of the reading room. 15 women in cardigans and sneakers talked about confidence, skill building, and navigating online job portals. It was quiet, but not timid. Somewhere in the second hour, Dorothy mentioned needing someone to speak at next month's session. Then she looked at me. I waved it off, but she pressed. Later, in the parking lot, she said something I didn't expect. "You know, you were the one who trained me. You taught me the difference between knowing a system and owning your place in it." I didn't know what to say. Dorothy handed me her card, told me to think about it. On the way back to the motel, I passed a bakery I used to like. The front display was filled with lemon bars. Amanda used to hate lemon desserts, said they always reminded her of something unfinished. I bought 2 anyway. Back in my room, I took out a pen and a notepad from my bag. I started writing what I might say, if I did decide to speak at that event. I wasn't ready yet, but I was thinking about it, and maybe that was enough for now. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like background noise in someone else's story. I felt like someone who still had a few chapters left to write. The letter came folded inside an old quarterly statement I almost threw away. It was from the local cooperative financial trust I had joined 30 years ago through the library. I barely remembered signing up, only that we were encouraged to set aside a small percentage of each paycheck. Back then, it felt like wishful thinking. Most months I didn't even notice the deduction, but they had noticed me. Inside the envelope was a letterhead and a new balance summary. Over $1 million, 1,143,000 and change. I read it twice, then once more just to be sure the decimal wasn't misplaced. I sat back in the chair, hands flat on my thighs. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. The feeling wasn't joy. It was quiet, like someone had finally turned off a background hum I never realized was there. It wasn't just the money. It was the proof that I hadn't disappeared. I took a breath and thought of Ruth, her coat, her peppermint, her son's silence. And I thought of all the other women like us, not tragic, not helpless, just left. That evening, I pulled out a notebook and wrote down a name. Silent Forward, a fund for women over 60, for mothers who'd been erased from birthdays, forgotten at holidays, left out of group photos. Not a charity, a reclamation. The next week, I met with a financial advisor recommended by Dorothy. We sat in a conference room with glass walls and quiet carpet. I told her what I wanted to do. She didn't blink. She just asked for the numbers. I transferred the full balance, set up the foundation, 50,000 allocated annually to scholarships, another 30 toward transitional housing. The rest went into a rotating community grant. I didn't want plaques or press. I wanted women to sit in job interviews and be able to say they had a place to sleep, a bus pass, clean clothes. I wanted someone like Ruth to get a phone call that began with, "We saw your application," and ended with, "When can you start?" Ruth was the first person I told. We met at a cafe near the riverfront. She wore a new jacket, still with the tag on the sleeve. She didn't ask why I called, just listened while I told her. I asked if she would consider being the face of it. Public voice, outreach, the one to answer letters when women didn't know who else to write to. She said yes, not with enthusiasm, with something better, with belief. We chose the name together, not loud, not bitter, just forward. That night, I sat by the window in my motel room and watched the parking lot fill and empty. People came and went, cars idled, brake lights blinked. But I stayed still. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something not to survive, but to build. Not just for me, but for women who had been told they no longer counted. I had spent so long shrinking myself to fit inside the expectations of a daughter, a wife, a mother. Now I was filling space again, and I wasn't going to apologize for it. Amanda called me just after 6 in the evening. I was slicing an apple and listening to the local news playing softly from the motel TV. Her name flashed on the screen of my old flip phone. I hadn't saved her number under anything special, just Amanda, nothing more. She started talking the moment I picked up. Her tone was bright, practiced, like the voice she used in holiday cards she never mailed. She mentioned the weather in Florida, the market trends, and then, casually, she said she was looking at a new property, a rental house. She called it a smart investment. I listened quietly, waiting. Then came the part I knew was coming. She needed my signature. It had to do with a mortgage approval. Said the lender required a co-signer, preferably a family member with stable financial standing. She spoke quickly, as if she could outrun my silence. I waited until she stopped. There was a long pause. I think she expected me to ask for details, to play the role I always did. Instead, I told her to send me the papers, not because I planned to sign, but because I needed to see exactly what she thought she could ask of me now. Later that night, I sat at the small desk in my motel room and laid out the documents she emailed. The numbers were large, the risk even larger. Amanda had listed her current income far higher than what I knew she earned. The down payment section was blank, and in the space marked co-applicant, she had typed my name in all capital letters. No conversation, no permission, just assumed compliance. I closed the laptop and stared at the wall. It was beige and peeling near the corner, but it held my focus better than her voice had. By morning, I called a lawyer. Not Dorothy, someone new. A woman named Carla, who specialized in elder financial abuse. She listened carefully and asked the right questions. She told me this happened more often than anyone liked to admit. I asked her to draft a formal response to Amanda's request. I wanted it clear, no room for interpretation. That evening, Amanda called again. This time her voice was tighter, clipped at the edges. She said she was surprised by the letter, said she thought I would support her, said it felt cruel coming from me. I didn't argue. I told her I was thinking about it, told her I would treat her request like a worksheet, something to solve with patience and honesty. She didn't like that. She hung up before I finished the sentence. I sat there for a while after the call, holding the phone in my hand like it still weighed something. Then I stood up, poured a glass of water, and sat back down at the desk. I opened a fresh page in my notebook. At the top, I wrote one line. You taught them how to treat you. Underneath, I started writing a list. Not of what I had lost, but of every time I said yes when I should have said not now. Every ride, every favor, every time I kept my mouth shut to keep the peace. It was a long list, and it ended with Amanda. I wasn't angry, I was done. There's a difference. I walked into Dorothy's office just after 9. The air smelled like coffee and lemon floor cleaner. Her assistant offered me tea, but I shook my head. My hands were steady, my mind clear. Dorothy stood up from behind her desk and gave me a look that was part professional, part personal. She had read between the lines of my last message. She didn't ask why I was there. She simply said, "Let's begin." We reviewed my will first. The old version sat printed in a pale green folder. Amanda's name was listed more than a dozen times. Accounts, real estate, jewelry, the second car. All of it flowed naturally to her, without condition. That version was 7 years old. Dorothy slid a clean stack of papers across the desk. Her pen tapped lightly on the top corner. This was the new version. Amanda's name was not there. Instead, I had chosen the Silent Forward Fund as the main beneficiary. The house, modest but mortgage-free, would be transferred into the fund's care. Any remaining financial accounts would be divided among 3 women-led non-profits I had worked with during the past year. The changes were legal, binding, and irrevocable. Dorothy asked if I wanted to include a personal statement. I nodded. She placed a recorder on the desk and pressed a small red button. I leaned forward, inhaled, and began. I spoke slowly. I said my full name. I listed the date and the reason for the amendment. Then I paused. For a long time. I said the following words without looking at her. Anyone who calls me a duty, a burden, or a transaction will no longer be a part of my legacy. I closed the file. Dorothy pressed stop. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. We signed everything, one by one. The witness came in, initials were added, and then it was done. On the way out, I slipped the original copy of the updated will into my bag. That evening, I emailed Amanda a single line. I met with my lawyer today. There is nothing more to discuss. She didn't respond right away, but I knew she would read it. A week later, a small manila envelope arrived at the front desk of the motel, my name written in Amanda's careful handwriting. No return address. Inside was a flash drive. Nothing else. I hesitated before plugging it in. It was a recording. Audio only. The sound was clear, crisp. Her voice, unmistakable. She was talking to someone. A friend. Maybe a co-worker. The same sentence repeated from earlier that year. Mother-in-law is family. Birth mother is obligation. Same tone, same sharp delivery. I listened to it once, then again. Not because I needed to hear it, but because I wanted to be sure I had not misjudged anything. I had not. I deleted the file, not out of anger, out of closure. Later that night, I opened my notebook again. Under the last entry, I wrote 3 words. No return needed. I folded the page and tore it out. Then I lit a match and watched it burn safely inside the metal sink. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to stop expecting an apology that will never come. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was free. Ruth's photo took up almost a quarter of the front page. It was one of those candid shots, the kind you only get when someone doesn't know they're being noticed. She was standing outside a red brick community center, holding a paper cup of coffee in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Her eyes weren't on the camera. They were looking off to the side, like she was listening to someone who really mattered. Above the photo, in bold, it read, From laundry room to legacy, the face behind Silent Forward's rising voice. I sat in the corner booth of the diner with the newspaper folded neatly beside my plate. The waitress had already asked twice if I was finished with my eggs. I hadn't touched them. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't mind. The words on that page held more warmth than any breakfast ever could. The article covered everything: Ruth's backstory, her years working in the hotel laundry, the way she raised her son on tips and overtime, how she lost touch with him after he left for college and never came back. But it didn't stop there. It spoke about the mission of the fund, how Silent Forward had already helped 72 women reconnect with housing, job skills, or simply a reason to get up in the morning. How Ruth had become more than a spokesperson. She had become a symbol, not of survival, but of choosing again, choosing dignity. I flipped to the second page. There was a smaller photo of Ruth, standing beside a group of women outside a workshop venue. Her smile stretched wide. Her hands weren't tucked away or hidden in her sleeves. They were open, expressive, alive. And then there was the quote, a real one this time. Not a soundbite, not gossip, just Ruth speaking from her own center. She said, I was invisible for years, but it wasn't until someone looked me in the eyes and didn't ask for anything that I remembered I still existed. Later that afternoon, I got a text from Amanda. I hadn't blocked her. Not yet. The message was short. Why is she in the paper and not me? No punctuation, no greeting, no sense of irony either. I stared at the words, not long, just long enough. Then I turned off my phone and walked outside. It was late October, the trees along the sidewalk just starting to give way. Leaves made their quiet fall, one by one. No rush, no noise, just the truth of change. I didn't reply to Amanda, not because I was trying to be cruel, but because some questions don't deserve an answer. They deserve a mirror. That evening, Ruth called me. She was breathless, giddy, said the center's phone had been ringing non-stop, said people were dropping by just to say thank you. One woman brought a bag of apples. Another came with a sketchbook filled with charcoal portraits of women she'd met on the bus. Ruth said she didn't know how to accept it. I told her she already had. All she had to do was keep showing up. After we hung up, I went back to the newspaper. I clipped the front page and folded it neatly. Then I slid it into the back of my journal, right behind the last list I had written. This one didn't need words, just presence. And that, I had learned, was more than enough. Amanda showed up at Dorothy's office on a Wednesday, unannounced. The receptionist called ahead. Dorothy didn't hesitate. She told her to let Amanda in. Dorothy told me everything later. Said Amanda wore a tailored coat and carried a thick folder under her arm. Her voice was tight, her smile polished. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She asked to review the original will. Dorothy said the request wasn't unusual, but her tone was. There was entitlement in the way Amanda sat. Like she believed that if she presented the right combination of words and legal pressure, the past would suddenly forget itself. Dorothy pulled out the relevant documents and placed them on the desk. She kept a straight face, the way she always did. Then, she reached over and pressed play on a small digital recorder she had prepared. Amanda's voice filled the room, crisp, cold. The same phrase, repeated in that clipped, dismissive tone she had once used so casually. Mother-in-law is family. Birth mother is obligation. Dorothy didn't speak. She didn't need to. Amanda stared at the desk. Her face gave nothing away at first, but something in her eyes cracked, like glass under too much weight. She adjusted her posture, cleared her throat, and reached for the folder in her lap. Inside were a few printed emails, screenshots of texts. She slid them forward. Dorothy glanced at them, then pushed them back. She said the revised will was final. The signatures were valid. The decision had been made in full capacity, with no coercion. There was nothing left to challenge. Amanda didn't argue. She didn't plead. She just sat there, quiet, as if for the first time she realized she had mistaken access for permanence. She folded the folder shut and left it on the chair beside her. When she stood, her voice dropped to a whisper. She said she had only been trying to build something for the family. She said she didn't know how things had gotten so far. Dorothy didn't respond. She only nodded politely and opened the door. After Amanda left, Dorothy sent me a text. Everything went as expected. She won't come back. That night, I found myself thinking not about Amanda's visit, but about Dorothy's calm, the steadiness of her presence, the way she held space for truth without needing to decorate it. Later, I took out the little flash drive Amanda had mailed me weeks before. I had kept it tucked in the back of a drawer. I wasn't sure why I hadn't thrown it away. This time, I didn't listen to the recording. I didn't need to. I simply walked outside and dropped it in the mailbox, addressed to Dorothy's firm. Let them file it away. Let it gather dust in some archive where old intentions go to sleep. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the edge of the bed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing tugging at me. No guilt, no second guessing, no quiet waiting for the phone to ring with an apology that would never come. Some doors don't slam shut. They close gently, click into place like they were always meant to. And on the other side of that quiet click, a whole world begins to open. I moved to Sandpoint in early October. The lake was already shifting into grey, its glassy surface rippling under soft wind. I found a small cabin through a retired teacher network. Nothing fancy. A porch with 2 rocking chairs, a pine table inside, shelves that creaked when you touched them. Just enough space for one person and her peace. There were no sirens at night, no sounds of car doors slamming, only the occasional thud of pine cones hitting the roof. I woke to bird calls instead of phone alarms. I didn't decorate much. A framed photo of the library's founding team, with my young face in the corner. A throw blanket Amanda had once picked out when she was 12, still soft from time. A stack of Ruth's postcards, rubber-banded together in a drawer. She wrote often, sometimes only a sentence or two, sometimes a full page. One card arrived with a dried flower pressed inside, and a note that read, "I keep forgetting I can still laugh. You reminded me." That one stayed on my kitchen counter. I took walks each morning around the lake. The air smelled of cedar and damp soil. Some days I brought a thermos of tea and sat by the dock. An older man named Bill often nodded hello. He didn't ask questions. I liked that about him. In town, I volunteered twice a week at the community centre, mostly organising books and updating the digital catalogue. A few local women my age joined me on Fridays. We called it a reading circle, but mostly we drank coffee and spoke about everything but books. They asked what brought me to Sandpoint. I only said, I needed a season of stillness. No one pressed further. Maybe they had their own reasons too. One afternoon, as I shelved a stack of biographies, I spotted a familiar name in the newspaper folded beside the donation bin. Ruth's face, smiling on the front page. Underneath, a headline in bold. From laundry to leadership. How one woman helped fund a future. It was a feature story in a regional magazine, picked up by local press. It talked about the grant programs, the foundation's impact, her role as spokesperson, her dignity, her voice. I read it slowly, then twice. I let every sentence fill the quiet space around me. That evening, I lit a candle by the window. It had been years since I celebrated anything in silence without sadness sitting beside it. But this time, I didn't feel alone. A week later, I received a package. Inside, wrapped in paper printed with quotes from women leaders, was a small wooden plaque. Ruth had carved it herself. It read, "For the woman who handed me a map when I thought the road had ended." Underneath, a second line carved deeper into the grain. "Keep going. The light follows those who walk with steady feet." I hung it by the door. Each time I stepped out, it was the last thing I saw. And every time I returned, it was the first thing that greeted me. My 71st birthday morning was quiet. The lake outside my window stretched still and wide, reflecting a sky coloured in soft grey and gold. I sat with a cup of chamomile tea, letting the warmth settle in my chest. No phone calls, no cake, but also no expectations. Around noon, a small envelope arrived in my mailbox. It didn't have a return address. The handwriting on the front was uneven, like it had been written slowly, with care. Inside was a handmade birthday card. The paper was slightly wrinkled, corners taped back together, but the front had a drawing of a woman with a red scarf standing by a mountain. The message inside was in block letters, scrawled with a blue crayon. "You don't know me, but you helped my mum. She told me you gave her a second chance, and that means I get to have my mum back. So I just wanted to say thank you. You're not my grandma, but I think you're really good." It was signed, Lani, age 9. I held the card in both hands for a long time. Then I placed it next to the candle by the window, next to Ruth's plaque. It felt heavier than it was, heavier in a way that steadied me. Later that day, I found a manila envelope tucked under my cabin door. I opened it and found a one-way Amtrak train ticket. No note, just a destination printed at the bottom: Whitefish, Montana. Departure open, no return date. Whitefish was where the foundation was hosting their next round of grant interviews, where Ruth would be speaking, where new stories were being written. I folded the ticket and slid it into my coat pocket. That night, I didn't light the candle. I didn't need to. I packed my small bag, zipped it closed, and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. Not in hesitation, but in quiet recognition. Sometimes, when the door closes behind you, it doesn't mean an ending. Sometimes it means you are finally walking toward the life that was waiting. And this time, I wasn't riding a bus. I was taking the train. If you've ever felt forgotten by someone you gave everything to, know this: silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's the first step to remembering your worth. If this story spoke to you or reminded you of your own quiet strength, take a moment to share it. Somewhere out there, another woman might need to hear it today. You're not alone. You were never alone.